Hi, I'm Ed Werder, your co-host for this podcast series examining the documentary America's Team, The Gambler and His Cowboys. My co-host, the great Darren Woodson, Ring of Honor member, Cowboys all-time tackling leader, and eventually we expect Hall of Famer.
Yeah, but we're praying for that, right?
Maybe this will be a vehicle that helps you in that quest. But we're joined today by the directors, Chapman and Maclain Way, who were instrumental in putting this whole docuseries together, 8 different parts, a lot of different storylines, spent 40 hours interviewing Jerry Jones. I know what it's like to interview Jerry Jones for 40 minutes and how much material you wind up with and how hard it is to organize it. So respect to you guys for dealing with 40 hours plus all the other stuff. So Netflix paid the Cowboys $50 million for this project. Were you a part of the pitch? Were you already committed to directing this series if Netflix got it?
Yeah. So, well, first of all, thanks for having us on, Ed and Darren. Really excited to be on the podcast and chat the Cowboys and the Cowboys documentary series with you guys. But no, Ed, to answer your question, my understanding is that Netflix basically commissions production companies. So I don't think that Netflix paid the Cowboys per se, but paid Skydance Media, who had a deal with the NFL Films, the Cowboys, and Jerry. And that was all set up, and Netflix had acquired the rights to tell that project long before we got a phone call about it. I do think that we were one of Netflix's first phone calls in terms of, hey, would you guys be interested in directing this? And my brother and I, we have a long working relationship with Netflix. We've directed documentaries for them for over 10 years now, sports documentaries and non-sports documentaries. And we knew the headlines of this story. We were pretty young in the early 90s, but we knew 3 Super Bowls. We knew Jimmy Johnson had won back-to-back Super Bowls and had gotten fired. And we knew maybe some of the bigger names on the team, but that was really about it. And it took a little bit of research and time diving in, reading articles that you had written, books that people had written, reading interviews with some of these guys. And we really jumped at it from pretty quickly off the bat because we knew it was such a compelling story.
Can you give us a sense of how it's been received and whether Netflix and you guys consider the end product a success based on viewership and feedback?
Yeah, definitely. I think, it's been in the top 10 for about 2 weeks, which is a great result for a sports documentary. It's 8 episodes. I know the completion rate was really strong, which is really difficult. Obviously, the more episodes you have. And so the feedback from our Netflix team has been nothing but real excitement for the fact that obviously a lot of sports people watched it. But I think the goal is always you want non-sports people to come in and watch it and people around the world. And, football is a pretty American sport, but to see some of the places around the world that really connected with the story of the Cowboys and the story of Jerry was really cool to see.
Yeah. So Chapman, let me ask you this. How do you two work together? And you actually have a third brother who's involved as well. How are those dynamics work as far as working together?
It's actually really strong. I think Mac and I we're similar in age and we get along really well. We have a pretty cool, good division of labor. I think Mac really does a lot of the research, a lot of the interviews. And then I kind of tend to help out a little bit more with the filming and the editing of it, although Mac obviously does a huge part in that as well. And so it's always fun for me because Mac does the bulk of the research and then kind of brings me back the best stories. And so the research process is fun for me because Mac does most of the heavy lifting.
And then it's Chap's job to make it good. So good luck with that.
Mac, what were the storytelling goals you had as you began to unfold this story?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that admittedly, we came to this story as outsiders, which is a disadvantage at first. It is. I tell any documentary filmmaker when they start on a big story. But I think slowly it turns into an advantage because it ultimately becomes a process of discovery. You're discovering things for the first time. And I think that having those outside eyes is a benefit. For me, the things that I did not know that jumped out early primarily were 2 things, and really they were the things that kind of, I think, at the end of the day, really pushed Chap and I to be like, okay, this is a really remarkable story, and almost became too irresistible to turn down or not do. One was that I really did not have any understanding that Jerry and Jimmy had like this long relationship that dates back to almost when they were 17 years old. I did not know that they were teammates at the University of Arkansas that had won a national championship on the same team in 1964. I knew a little bit about their breakup. And so, but that knowing that these guys had that long relationship, the second thing that I just didn't know about is I didn't know that after learning about all the controversy that came with the firing of Tom Landry, I didn't know that they went 1-15 in their first season. And it just immediately stood out to me as like, what a remarkable way to start a story. Like, not only do you ignite the hatred and the passion of Dallas by firing the only coach, the legendary Tom Landry that they've ever had, but in your first season, you go out there and you pretty much faceplant and you go 1-15. So for me, knowing that history, knowing that they struggled that first season so well, ultimately knowing they're going to win back-to-back Super Bowls and then have this epic divorce and breakup, as a storyteller, like, those arcs, those narrative arcs don't come along in many sports stories. So for us, that was an immediate attraction to telling the story.
What surprised you about the team, the personalities of the team? Because there's so many personalities, the Charles Haley's that you guys interviewed. What surprised you about those interviews?
I think what surprised me was you really got a true sense of what a brotherhood this team was. And I think for us kind of growing up watching sports in the 2010s, and it definitely, a lot of sports have become much more of an individual endeavor, and seeing the training camp footage of the early 90s with Jimmy Johnson and seeing the sessions afterwards and the practices and the tape watching sessions. And then we'd find footage of you guys, swimming in the local pools outside and playing dominoes together. And like, it was really, really cool to see, like, wow, man, these guys like really had each other's back. And I know that's a little bit of a cliche in some ways, but seeing the footage firsthand that encapsulated that brotherhood, and then interviewing some of the players and seeing how emotional a lot of these memories were. Was pretty remarkable.
I think the other thing too was because Chap and I this is our first football documentary we've ever made, but we've made a baseball documentary, we made a hockey documentary, we've made a sailing documentary, we made a tennis documentary. This was really our first time tackling football, no pun intended. And I think the thing that stood out quickly for me, and listen, Chap was a basketball player, I was a baseball player, so we neither of us have played a single down of football in our entire life. But the thing that stood out about the sport of football that resonated when talking to all these teammates was, in baseball, the sacrifice you can make for a teammate is kind of laying a bunt down and moving the runner over. Or in basketball, you might set a pretty hard pick to get a guy open. But in football, the sacrifices that each and every teammate makes for the success of the entire team and for their brother that's right next to them, that the camaraderie that builds, it stood out by far more than any other sport I've ever had the pleasure of making a documentary on. And that wasn't something that I necessarily knew starting this process, but very quickly in seeing those bonds, and honestly, it grew my appreciation for the sport in a really, it's a beautiful thing. And I think that was a unique and surprising experience.
Yeah, one of the things in watching the documentary was watching my teammates be as open as they were. I mean, we've always been open within the locker room, but you guys did a really great job. And I remember the Nate Newton interview where Nate was just open and transparent about the times he'd be out partying and the police officers are taking him home. Like, those are stories we knew in the locker room, but for him to just come out and say it, I mean, those are just great interviews and how you guys pulled that information out.
Yeah, I think it's always like important for us. I think in some sense, like the X's and O's of the sport is maybe a little bit less interesting to us as filmmakers than kind of capturing the humans and the humanity at the center of this. And I think that's what connects us to stories and sports. I think Jerry understood that very early on in promoting the players and getting the fans to get to know the team and the players. And so, yeah, it was just like really, 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 really powerful, like, getting to know these guys on not just as athletes, but like, who's behind the helmet? Who are these people? What makes them tick? What are their fears? What are they? And I think part of our job is spending time with them and giving them confidence that, like, look, we're going to work really hard over the next year to make something good and cool and that honors you guys. So let's, like, let's work together and let's be open, let's be vulnerable, and let's make something that actually has maybe hopefully a lasting impact.
And like I always, Chap and I, we would talk at length with these guys too about everyone about it is a balance. Like we had no intention of just making a dark expose because that's not what this team deserved. Like there were such beautiful moments and such successes that we always pitched like, listen, we're going to try and work as hard to capture that feeling of when you guys won that Super Bowl 52-17 in Pasadena, what that moment was like as that clock wound down at 0. And we're going to score it big and we're going to edit it big. And we're going to try and dig through all the amazing NFL films footage to find the best shots we can to immerse audiences in that moment. And you guys are going to love that. But at the same token, Michael, hey, when we talk about the trial that you had to go through in 96, we're also going to put effort into capturing what that moment was like. And ultimately, you never totally know how accurate something is that you're telling a long story that happened 30 plus years ago. But by including the highs and the lows, hopefully you're painting an overall somewhat accurate picture of the whole story.
Begin this project, when you become a part of it, you have to, I assume, believe that, wow, Jerry Jones really needs to be good because he's going to be the driving force and the central figure in all of this. He's 82 years old. What was your takeaway when you met with him for the first time? Did you come away convinced he could carry the piece if necessary?
Yeah, I think that was actually a huge component to us kind of agreeing to do this in a way. When Netflix first approached us, my first thought was like, great, we're going to get 20 minutes with Jerry Jones, and then we're going to have to edit 8 hours of content. Like, the guy's got a upcoming season he's preparing for.
He's got $15 billion or whatever.
We're just going to be bugging this guy for the next 2 years for just like little morsels of interviews. And, we flew out there, we met with him. Mac actually spent a little bit more time with him in the beginning. And I'll never forget, like, the first time we met with them, he was telling us what makes a good story: drama, conflict, it's a soap opera. And I was like, holy crap, this is usually our pitch to the subjects, and he's pitching it back to me. And so I remember walking out of his office with Mac. I'm like, I think this is going to be a pretty interesting interview because he's pretty open. Like, he kind of made it clear, like, no questions were off the table. And he understood that, like, this was going to be a project that captured, like, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And not only did he understand that, he was excited by that. And so that was kind of honestly a first as a documentary filmmaker to work with a subject who was excited about the unsavory parts as much as the good stuff.
It seemed like to me, as somebody who covered those teams and has been in Dallas really from the same time Jerry got here and Troy got here and Jimmy was hired in 1989, the one thing that was the biggest revelation to me was Jerry's cancer diagnosis and his treatment for that, which you kind of shared with the world. Nobody knew about that, even the people who covered this most closely. How did you want to tell that part, and why was it kind of limited in scope?
Yeah, what's interesting is that was just something that Jerry kind of walked himself into just by the virtue of just doing these like long form hours of interviews. And it was interesting because he called it a cancer scare, which I can admit was not language that caused me to ask a ton of follow-ups about it. It was actually a little news for me when Brad Townsend further did reporting on it based off that little mention that Jerry gave in the documentary, where it was stage 4 and it was much more serious. So we actually did not have a very deep understanding of how serious that cancer was. To be honest, when Jerry mentioned the cancer scare, I was more surprised because he was using it as a story to illustrate kind of some medical advice he had been given. It was like a doctor telling him, like, hey, practice meditation as you're kind of going through this cancer scare. One of the meditative practices we think you should do is like give really positive, wishful thinking to people who have, historically gotten under your skin. And Jerry said, and the joke that Jerry tells really well is come up with a list of 10 people, come back in 2 weeks, we'll go through all 10 names. Jerry comes back in 2 weeks and he says, well, I can't get past this first name. Jimmy Johnson's the number 1 on my list and I can't get past it. So it was more, the cancer was like, wow, but it was more just shocking that he has a cancer diagnosis. He's kind of given this medical advice, but at the end of the day, this guy, Jimmy Johnson, he just cannot get past it. And this was years. I think this was in the early 2000s, mid-2000s. So that's kind of what stood
It's
out
so
to me.
interesting. It was a total afterthought. And then reading the Dallas Morning News article, I was just like, crap, how did we not ask more follow-ups on this? Like, no one in the room thought to ask about it. And I remember kind of like, is that public? And Mac and I were like, I don't know if he's talked about that before, but it was really, really fascinating. To learn it was stage 4 and he had multiple operations, and like, it was a legitimate deal. And I mean, it's always fascinating me. Like, you never know what people are going through, and that was one of those things where, Jerry takes a lot of heat, and I don't think anyone knew what he was going through in 2011. And so I thought I'm glad we were able to include it in ours, and I'm glad, journalists were able to even further the story even more.
And it's interesting, like you said, that he was using it to make a point about the deep issues that he had and strong feelings he had for Jimmy Johnson, and the fact that they broke up. How hard was it to get Jimmy to be willing to sit down and engage fully about that period of time and that experience?
Yeah, it was the amount of challenging that I thought it would. I would not say it was easy, but I would not say it was impossible. I think that it's always a little difficult getting people to rehash old battles, wounds that have healed over, and not in a way that we're trying to kind of rip those old wounds over, but we're just trying to do our job and kind of accurately explain to an audience, how could an owner fire a coach that's won back-to-back Super Bowls? I mean, that was honestly my biggest fear as a filmmaker.
Amen.
I was more worried that our audiences were just going to be confused by it if we didn't really push both Jerry and Jimmy to really elaborate on what their issues were. And I think that they both actually do have a tremendous amount of respect and admiration for one another. So I do think that there was some initial hesitancy to just really dive in and rehash what they probably thought was old news, but it was very important for us, and we did not give up on it. And it was probably the thing that we probably spent the most time talking to both of them about, was their relationship with one another.
Yeah.
And I think it was important to let everyone know, like, ultimately, Netflix had Final Cut. And so everyone was going to get to share their version of their story, And so I think that was important, obviously, for Jimmy and some other players involved, which is like, look, like, everyone's going to get to tell things how they saw it. And everyone had kind of different takeaways. It was really interesting. Even when we discussed the Jimmy firing, like, it was interesting hearing from players who had different reactions, from just outright anger, feeling betrayed, confusion, to like, even some people understood it a little bit more. And so I think it was important for us to include like a lot of different perspectives. And I know that it was, talking to Jimmy was important to him that we would include his perspective.
Yeah, and I still don't understand it. I played on those teams, so I'm still lost on that situation. But let me ask you this. The Herschel Walker trade was a huge event that took place within this organization. I was actually a part of that trade. I was the second round pick that they acquired then. To this day, even through watching the show, you look at both of them and they still have their own stories about this. Which one of those guys did you believe?
It's interesting because we've come across moments like this in other documentaries we've made, where it's like, hey, it's not just two interpretations of something. It's like, no, one thing happened and I'm getting two drastically different versions of what happened. And so it was interesting to kind of ping pong back and forth. Ultimately, I and your point is right. It's like, if you get both Jerry and Jimmy in the same room and ask them who deserves credit for the Herschel Walker trade, you're going to be in that room for a while, because you're going to get two different answers. But what was interesting is I think that my ultimate, if like gun to my head, I had to decide, I would say that I think it was an idea that was in the building. And I know that sounds like a diplomatic cop-out answer, but Jerry was pretty emphatic of like, listen, Tex Schramm was the first person that ever told me about Herschel when I bought the team. Now that's, okay, so months are going to go by, because I think Herschel got traded in week 6 of the 89 season. Maybe I think Jimmy probably reignited that idea based on what offers. And I actually, after the documentary, I went back and I read Swagger, which is Jimmy Johnson's biography. And surprisingly, if you read his chapter on the Herschel Walker trade, it is more of a we than I think a version that he gave in the 30 for 30 ESPN documentary. So it's like even some of the stories within the guys have slightly shifted over the years, if I could. That was my, but Chad, what do you think?
One of my favorite filmmakers is David Fincher, and he says the best scenes are when both characters are right. And I always feel like as a filmmaker, it's not my responsibility to choose who's right or wrong, but to make both characters right. Yeah. And then let the audience decide how they feel. I feel like there's enough information in there for audiences to come away with their own takeaways.
Yeah, that very well answered. You guys are both politically correct.
But it seems like the whole thing that included was about who had control, right? Who had personnel control. Well, surely there was a contract between the two. Did you ever have a chance to look at that to say, oh, well, the way this language reads to me, Jimmy did have control or Jerry did have final say?
Yeah, we did have that contract. And it was interesting. At first glance, it's like it does read a little clearly that Jimmy nothing can be done without prior approval of Jimmy. But then Jerry had a rebuttal when I pressed him on the contract. And you guys should ask him too. But his rebuttal was, well, when we drafted that contract, it was written that ultimately the owner would have superseding control over both the general manager and the coach. And so at that point, I got to be honest, I did not go to law school. So I was like, all right, I kind of have two guys who were both parties to this contract that have both their interpretations over who controls the levers of power here. And I think we had in the documentary tried including even the disagreement over the analysis over the contract in the film.
We used to have that section in there, and everyone got so bored. Everyone was like, what is this? We were trying to explain the legalese. It took us 10 minutes to describe something that people were still confused by. So ultimately, it didn't make it in.
In terms of storylines you overlooked, Jerry was asked about that, and he cited the Steve Walsh draft choice, which made.
He let us know about that many times.
Oh, he did. Okay, so for people who don't know, in 1989, the Cowboys made Troy Aikman the first overall pick in the regular draft, and a few months later, the NFL had a supplemental draft, and the Cowboys made Steve Walsh. They surrendered their first pick the following year to take Steve Walsh in the first round of that draft. An unprecedented move to take two quarterbacks in the first round. And one of them, by the way, Steve Walsh had just won a national championship for the Cowboys head coach Jimmy Johnson and so many members of his staff he brought. So that created a lot of conflict and I think really got Troy's relationship with Jerry and Jimmy, off on the wrong foot. So how is it that you didn't include that? It had to be a choice.
That was another section that we actually had edited. There's various versions of this documentary. It was in there at a couple different points. And I know it was very important to Jerry because to Jerry's credit, he feels very much like I was the one that put my hand down for Troy Aikman, and even when Jimmy was drafting Steve, like I made it clear I want Troy. I think there's kind of a couple answers. One's a little bit more boring, but it is true, which is, whether we made the right decision or the wrong decision, we kind of decided to focus more on the Steve Berline controversy. In the following season, Troy gets hurt, Steve takes over, and that kind of became a real controversy of who was going to start in the playoffs, Steve Berline or Troy. So as a filmmaker, when we had both quarterback controversies in there, by the time we got to the Steve Berline controversy, it kind of felt like a narrative repeat of the previous quarterback controversy. So it ultimately ended up getting trimmed. You're also trying to get runtime down a little bit. And it was always a conversation in the edit room, like, is this just for diehard Cowboy fans or will it resonate with a wider audience? I think ultimately maybe we should have found a way to include it. Like, I don't know. Maybe. Well,
what's funny is because Jerry, he was emphatic. Like, well, you're missing one of the. And the problem with '89 is we kind of just told it in one swing, which is they come out, they get their butts kicked by New Orleans. Then Jimmy says that losing shit stops now. It doesn't. They trade Herschel Walker. Nope, they lose out for the rest of the season. And so it was a little hard to stop down and tell the Steve Walsh story. Maybe this is more embarrassing, but Jerry used to be like, You got to include Steve Walsh. And he would explain to me the story. And I remember I had to stop and I said, we interviewed Steve Walsh. We interviewed him for the documentary. Like, we know of this story. It was difficult because episode 2, when you look at episode 2, and Chap's right, this is probably too boring of an answer, I'm sorry, but it includes 89, 90, 91, and 92 all the way up to that Eagles win. And so it was always a very tough episode. It was our hardest episode by far because we had made the decision, if you want to get a global audience invested, you have to get audiences to episode. You got to get them a little fast to these Super Bowls, and tough decisions were made. So sorry, Steve and Jerry. Happy to say that Chap, should we just make everyone happy and say we made a mistake? We should have gotten it in.
So much for those who think Jerry had editorial control.
Steve Walsh. I forgot that we actually did the whole interview.
We interviewed him for like 4 hours. Yeah.
Sorry, Steve. Sorry,
Yeah.
Steve.
Well, I thought you guys got Jimmy. I mean, Jimmy was an asshole. Like, he was the biggest asshole on the planet. And I thought you guys did a great job of not only, because I came in 1992. I know I'm going to say this, but in 1992, I came in and I didn't have the relationship that the Emmets and the Troys and the Michael Irvins had with Jimmy. All I knew was Jimmy was the stop. There was no one above Jimmy. He made all decisions, and it was just, I mean, you ask anyone that came in with me in 92 and 93, and they'll tell you, man, this guy was just all football. And I thought you guys did a great job of showing that Jimmy didn't have a personal life. This was it. This was it.
That was honestly,
yeah, and
that was one of the shocking things was when I came across the archive that he had divorced his wife, and I was like, wait, what? And I was like, yeah, the guy divorced his wife so he could just focus on football. And I was like, holy crap,
you're not all in if you're married.
Level of dedication, you know. I was like, this is pretty interesting. But yeah, sorry to interrupt.
No, I just thought you guys did a great job of showing. Like, there was another side of Jimmy as well, like the relationship with Troy. You know, he used to go to Troy's house. Like, I would have never knew that there was that Jimmy had actual relationships with some of the players, because as a young guy, you just were told what to do and you just did it, and that was it. There was no personal side of Jimmy, and I thought you guys did a great job of showing that.
Yeah, his commitment was legendary, and it showed in the archive footage. Like, even when this was another little anecdote that was cut out, but Norv Turner gave a great little story about, hey, I like to come into the office early, but my first season, I also found out Jimmy liked to come into the office early. So my first day, I'm in at 6 a.m. and Jimmy comes in at 6:15. And so the next day I come, Jimmy had gotten there a little before me, but both of them had liked their mornings kind of with an empty office, to the point that they're both trying to beat each other to the office at like 4 a.m. And finally, Jimmy comes into Norv's office and says, enough, dude. I want the first hour without anyone here, so you can't come into the office until 6 a.m. Otherwise, we're going to be here all night. But it does show how committed they were. I mean, I think Jimmy lived like 3 blocks away from Valley Ranch when he first came to the facility. And I think that we were just so impressed with how Jimmy handled the players. What was interesting, so many players who were there in '89 said that Jimmy was a little bit more, not loose. I don't know if I'm using the right word. Ed, maybe you'll have insight onto this. But the better the team got, the more tight Jimmy became, which makes sense. I think that's what you need to push a team to go win the Super Bowl, especially a young team like that. But it almost seemed like as the team got better, Jimmy became even more tighter in terms of control over the team.
I think it was really interesting. I mean, it was a pretty fascinating arc for me to see. Like you said, a lot of players are like, man, this guy's an asshole, But then when he gets fired, to see how much those players loved him and loved playing for him. Yeah. And that was really interesting. There's a lot of coaches that people hate in the beginning and they hate at the end. Yeah. But to see that arc of, man, this guy's an asshole, to like, man, I would do anything for this coach was really, really special.
That was me. Yeah, and that was me. I didn't know you don't know what you have until it's gone, right? But I think Jimmy was in the moment of knowing what he had. And the Troy Aikmans were in the moment of knowing, hey, we can put, 3 of these back to back. We can do another 4. We may have an opportunity to win 5 of these championships. And for a young player, all I saw was just the dynamic of Jimmy walking in and just being hard on us. But he was in the moment. Troy was in the moment. Michael Irvin, they were in the moment because they had come from the 89s and the 90s, and now they knew they had this run. And, you have to appreciate it. So when Jimmy left, you started to see the downfall of this organization.
And Troy Aikman really spoke to that, and you
Yeah.
should.
Yeah.
Like, what was the cultural difference between Jimmy's reign and Barry's tenure?
Well, it's different. I mean, the difference was, Barry Switzer inherited all of Jimmy's coaches. So and you guys said it on the show, that you knew that there was going to be this dynamic within the locker room, within the coaching staff, that everyone wanted that job. Butch Davis wanted that job. Joe Avazano wanted that job, and there was this undertow underneath the team that was basically saying, look, we're not going to play for this guy. Jimmy's our guy, and then I should have this job. So we're just people. We're all people, and there was this dynamic where there was an argument that was taking place, and they didn't have Barry's back. They never had Barry's back through this process.
So
yeah, it's got to be tough to coach on that team too. I mean, what's interesting, and Darren, I'd love to hear your thoughts, because obviously we would always ask players like, okay, well, if Jimmy stayed on, how many Super Bowls, right? Like, because that's a question you guys get asked all the time, so we obviously had to do it. But I'm curious do you think Jimmy could have maintained his approach as a coach with the Troy, Emmett, Michael, those guys that were on the team before you, as they got massive contracts, they become multimillionaires? Do you think that would have been a challenge to possibly motivate those older vets the way that he was able to do it when they were young and rookies? I'm just curious.
You know what? It's a great question, because free agency really started to take place then. The numbers started to increase. Bigger contracts, and bigger contracts lead to bigger personalities throughout the. I don't know. That's a great question. I don't know. I really don't know if he could have maintained that. I think one of the things that Jimmy did a great job of was having the pulse of the team and being able to put his thumb on a certain person to get them motivated, or just absolutely cutting a guy for falling asleep in the meeting. Like, he knew how to get you motivated in those situations. But money's a different tale. And free agency really started to open up when Jimmy and that was in the 93, 94 seasons when free agency started coming around. I don't know if he could have maintained the same success in managing the team accordingly. I do think that we would have won 3 straight. I firmly believe that, and we would have had an opportunity to win 4 or 5.
So here's a question for you guys. As we wrap this up, we're about to go off the satellite here pretty soon. Maybe we'll do 8 episodes with you guys, if that's okay. But one of the things I wondered, and I wondered this as you guys were shooting this, and all of a sudden the Cowboys are at Carolina, and Jerry announces that Jimmy is going to go into the Ring of Honor. After all these years and all these times he'd promised to put him in and didn't honor that, all of a sudden now he's going in. What role, if any, do you think this documentary played in Jerry deciding to put Jimmy Johnson in the Ring of Honor?
It's a good question. There was never like an explicit like, hey, Jerry, this would be great for the documentary. We should do it. That didn't happen. But I'm not naive enough to pretend that Jerry has an incredible sense of narrative, an incredible sense of showmanship, and an incredible sense of like, this would be good entertainment, So I think Jerry was feeling that around, and maybe the door started to open and it made sense. So I do think our documentary and our existence of it was helpful in terms of that. But listen, I think that we did
when we signed on though, Mac, they were already having like real deep discussions.
It was. We didn't get into it too much in the documentary, but Troy Aikman, I think, does deserve quite a bit of credit for pushing Jerry. I know that there was a sit down or two that were, I don't know if sit down's too formal of a word, but it was really becoming something that Troy was pushing for. And my understanding is he activated a lot of the players to help push Jerry towards this. Now, listen, I do want to say that my understanding was, I talked to a lot of guys in the media, and like someone like Dale or, colleagues of yours. And it seemed like Jerry, and I could be wrong, I could be naive, did not really hold grudges towards people that criticized him in the media. It does seem like he held one, and that was Jimmy. But to me, that's not a criticism of Jerry. I think that always just showed me how much these guys did hurt each other. And they caused each other pain, and that's okay. And now I think it is a beautiful reconciliation where, listen, they're never going to agree on the Herschel Walker trade, but they can be in the same room with each other. They can toast to what they achieved together. I think there's a beautiful message, and you can disagree with someone over something, but that doesn't mean that you have to hate them, and I think that there is something nice about Jerry and Jimmy's relationship, that they are as old as they are, and that hatchet does feel buried to a certain degree.
My last question is there enough unused material and enough interest that there could be a sequel?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, especially if Cowboys can make a run. I mean, they looked pretty good in their opener. I know that they didn't come away with it, but I was impressed. If there's a run here, if there's something interesting or exciting, yeah, we got to make 8 episodes, but I felt like we could have made 20. I mean, that's the type of team, Darren, you played on, and like I said, we came to this documentary not knowing a ton about it, but learned so much, and that's just how special this ball club was.
Well, I got 2.
Chap, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I've been kind of putting it in Netflix's ear, which is, if the Cowboys make a real run this year, like, let's get cameras. Like, Jerry and the Jones family gave us incredible access. They're really, really cool people. We know them all really well, and I think a lot of people watch this documentary. I think it would be pretty fascinating to kind of, if they can make a deep playoff run, to have cameras there and capture it.
Yeah, you need to. You're definitely, if they start to win games, you're definitely doing another one of these, right? Are you Cowboys fans now?
I am. You know what? It was interesting. I didn't know if I would watch after the documentary series came out, and I turned the game on, and I found myself rooting for them against the Eagles the other week. So I would love to see it, and I think that is the working with this family a little bit. I think that there's a lot of fair media criticism out there, but I think the one thing that this is my personal experience, I'm only speaking for myself, is I think this family wants to win, and I think they're desperate to win another Super Bowl for their dad. And I felt that on a human level, and I think it's brought me over to the Cowboys side. So, what about you, Chap? Are you
it's probably not journalistically sound, but I think after learning the whole history of this team, from Landry all the way through Jimmy Johnson, all the way through the modern years, and really spending all the time we did with Jerry, like, I think, and his impact that he had on the NFL, I think would be pretty cool for Jerry to see Jerry win one more while he's still around. I think would be pretty special for football fans just in general around the world. So I'm definitely rooting for him. I'll put it out there. You can print it. I'm rooting for the Cowboys.
Maclain and Chapman Way, the directors of America's team, the Gambler and his Cowboys. So great to interview you guys. Thanks for all the great stories, the insights, and for including me in the documentary. And I think Woody should definitely be in the sequel.
In the sequel, no doubt. No doubt. The sequel.
Thanks, guys.
We appreciate you guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Darren.
Thanks so much, guys.
Bye.